about the 4 ways to start an Airbnb business on the African continent. Marvin helped me to bring my Airbnb business to the next level. He is an amazing consultant, business consultant. And Marvin, please, I don't want to tell too much. Please, you tell us about yourself, what you're doing, what brings
Yeah,
you to Kenya.
yeah. Thanks first for having me. But yeah, just to give you a little background, don't not to bore you too much. But I've been living in Kenya for the last 3 years, almost since January 2023, and ever since been also like even before that consulting different businesses in Germany. I moved from Germany initially, started in Germany consulting different e-commerce businesses. Then also had clients in the UK, in Czech Republic, in the US, in the many different countries. Even then later on work with Kenyan startups and Ugandan startups. So I worked all over the place with different kinds of businesses. Got very many interesting insights from all these different companies. So that was quite nice, and yeah, just gave me so much experience, especially for the young age. Because when I moved here, I was 23. Yeah, so now it's been almost 3 years, and yeah, and then ever since we've been also working together for a long time with Wayne now, consulting now different short-term rental businesses here. Have also our own training and coaching program here together to help the diaspora and investors to invest here in short-term rental business, or let's say Airbnb, if that's it's a bit clearer, here on the African continent, to actually run profitable, but also to feed back into the communities, transfer skills, and just to build something sustainable for, yeah, just what's more purpose driven.
Thank you. Thank you. Amazing, all the skills, the experience. And yeah, I'm so glad to have you on board. Fam, if you haven't subscribed to his channel yet, I don't really know what you're waiting for. I put the link to his channel in the description below. So make sure to follow Marvin Greifenberg. And yeah, before we start talking about the 4 different ways to enter the Airbnb business, you've touched upon yeah, a very important point to clarify in the beginning. When we say Airbnb business, what we actually mean is a short-term rental business, meaning that we rent out properties on a short-term rental basis, which also, yeah, is defined in different ways depending on the rules and regulations. In some country, um, if you rent out for longer than 3 weeks, is considered long term, 1 month, 6 months. But we're talking about, yeah, less than a month, I would say, right? And so, yes, there are different platforms. You have to understand that Airbnb is just one of many platforms, short term rental platforms that exist out there. I think Airbnb became very popular in the last years because of yeah, they were able to offer more, I would say, local experiences, right? And it's mostly private homes that are listed in on the Airbnb platform. Yeah, villas, but also sometimes single bedrooms, right? Shared. I think there used to be the option to rent a shared room. I cannot
Mm,
find that anymore on the Airbnb platform.
mm,
Anyway, so I think the second most known, or even I think more popular worldwide, is booking.com. Then we have VRBO. And yeah, maybe before we dive into the 4 different ways, Marvin, do you want to say something about the different short-term rental platforms? What makes them different from each other? What are the benefits?
yeah, just to give maybe like a cross example that maybe it makes sense. I said we use mainly Airbnb more or less like than a buzzword, because everybody understands the term Airbnb more than like short-term rental. But as you explained, it's like you have booking.com, you have VRBO, you have trip.com, that's maybe targeted a bit more towards like the Chinese market as well. It's called C-Trip as well for them. You have platforms that are a bit more specified for like last minute bookings, or for midterm rentals, or for long-term rentals. So you have all these different platforms for like all these different niche markets as well. There's also one that's called halal booking or something, that's very specific for like this one specific target group. And I would say just like Airbnb and Booking are right now the biggest, even if Airbnb I think is right now losing quite a lot of market share, at least in the States, but still the biggest ones currently. But there are many other ones coming up at the moment as well. So it's just different ways. Imagine that what I meant with the cross example is, for example, I come from the space also of e-commerce, for example, and in e-commerce you use these platforms just as a source of traffic. So it means you use this for getting eyeballs, and Airbnb is one source of eyeballs, Booking is another source of eyeballs, VRBO as well, and so on and so on. So all these different platforms just gives you more exposure because people spend time on different platforms or have different preferences, and therefore it's just like, yeah, be active on as many as possible just to get more attention, that to also hit different markets, I would
Mm-hmm.
say. Yeah.
Okay. And I think why Airbnb experienced such a fast growth and popularity was because it allowed people who are not professionals in the real estate industry, right? Small players like me, even locals on the African continent, to finally participate in the tourism industry that was previously, I would say, more dominated by big international hotel chains. Like, for instance, when I compare 2008, when I went to Zanzibar for the first time as a student, there was only luxury resorts and big hotels, luxury hotels. There was maybe one hostel. And when I compare it to now, Airbnbs are popping out like mushrooms. And I think the reason why, as I said, it became so popular is because it is so accessible. I mean, the founding story of Airbnb is a perfect example, right? Marvin, please share how that
Yeah.
started, how the
If
idea came up.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, like with every business, most of the time they solve problems for themselves. And I think I forgot the city where they were in, but it's
San
somewhere in this
Francisco. I think
San
San Francisco.
Francisco. And there was some kind of big event happening in San Francisco, I think. And the founders, I think they were just trying to solve a problem for themselves, and were just like laying out mattresses, I think, in a friend's apartment, like air mattress in a friend's apartment, to then host other friends there in the beginning. I don't know if they even charge for it or like just very little. So this is was the beginning when they were like, hey, wait, this is actually making sense, because people are looking for rooms. All the big hotels are booked now, so we need to offer more alternatives. So it was a quite interesting story. But this is said is I see the same thing with like many other startups or like big companies today. They solve always the problems for themselves on a very very small scale first, and then later on something big like this comes out of this. Yeah, so it's very. I think it's fascinating.
And I think the founding story is a great way to dive straight into the first strategy and way to enter the Airbnb business game, which is basically you rent out a spare room in your apartment or in your house. Even though this is like an extreme example that they rented out air mattresses on the floor in the living room, but you can technically rent out a spare room on Airbnb on a short term rental basis. And I think this is a great way to start, especially for people for the diaspora who have a family home on the African continent. Like, for instance, I did this with my mother's property in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I moved in there myself and I renovated the space, furnished the space, invested around, I would say, 10,000 US dollars because it was a quite big house and furnitures were very expensive. Today they're even more expensive anyway. So I rented out the spare rooms that I had, which were 3 rooms, and the other remaining 2 rooms I used to reside myself in with my children, right? And so this was like I would say a low risk strategy because I invested into our own property, into a family property, and I was able to, take more ownership from the start in the renovation process, in the hosting, in the turnovers. And so, yes, this is, I believe, it's a great way to start if you have a property on the African continent. If your mom, your father, your uncle has a property that has spare rooms or that has no tenants at all, right? And where you can, basically move in relatives of you who then take care of the operations. However, what I found interesting is a challenge that not just me, but many Africans face who think about that. Remember, one of our community members wanted to do the same, take the same approach with the family property in Burundi, right?
Mm.
And it's the difficulty, the challenge is here sometimes convincing your family members, those who also have a stake and a say in what's happening with that property. So you either convince them or you bring enough money on the table to do it on your own. But I would say this is a low risk entry strategy, not the lowest risk. We will share it in the end, right? Number four, the most affordable way, the most easiest way to enter the Airbnb business game with zero capital. However, this is the first one, renting out a spare room in your home. You can technically do that even now if the laws, rules, and regulation allow it where you are now. The second strategy, Marvin, is the rental arbitrage concept, which
Mm.
basically that's what we are doing, right, on the island of Zanzibar.
Mm.
And that's what we are also promoting since that has worked for us. You want to share your thoughts on rental arbitrage?
Yeah, yeah. So first of all, maybe there's also what I see often, like more often than I thought I would see, is like there's a belief that oftentimes that you need to own a property to start this kind of business, and I think this is the method that shows you that it's not very necessary. I don't know where everybody here is based, but like it depends. For example, this works in every country, even in the States, wherever like people do it already, that they do basically rent properties and sublet them as a on a short-term basis. And that's the same thing we are also like doing here basically, as Wayne said, but also is the lower risk entry into the market. And also I would say in the beginning, especially if you are limited in capital, and even if you have a lot of capital and you are not sure about this business model, if you're not sure about the market, it's like a low risk entry because you don't have to invest all your money or like a big chunk of your money, whatever like your budget looks like, into one single property that might be a 2 3 bedroom apartment, whatever it is, and you're just like stuck with this one. And with rental arbitrage, basically, it's like I said, you rent an apartment from someone, you sublet it as a, you furnish it, you rent it like empty, unfurnished, you furnish it, give it the special touch it needs to get competitive and to get actually clients in, and yeah, then you sublet it via platforms like Airbnb, as we discussed, in being Airbnb, Booking.com, your own website, Vrbo, whatever it is, to then make a profit on top of the expenses you have from the lease and everything. It's also, as Wendy said, it's a lower risk entry than like buying property. What I think is the next thing we want to talk about. Yeah, sorry for taking it away, but still more costly, but also more profitable than maybe just renting out the spare room in your house or something. Yeah, maybe you go ahead with the next, not the next option.
Yeah, the next option, the next way to enter the Airbnb game is by purchasing a property, either an apartment or villa, house, and then transform it into a short-term rental. And yes, it's you mentioned it already, but it always blows my mind that people still not know that you don't have to own a property to make money with it, right? And I often get the question, Wayne, should I rent or buy a property to start my Airbnb business? And for the same reasons that you have just mentioned, especially when it comes to starting a business on the African continent, any business, not just a short term rental business, I always recommend to start small and test the market. And so that's what you could do with rental arbitrage. And if you see it works out and if you make a good deal, it's only then that I would maybe, I'm not sure if I would even do that, invest into buying a property. And I just remember 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I was invited to a talk of a big YouTuber here based in Kenya, Dr. King Ori. And I cannot forget the story that he shared with me. They were also at a point, this channel is all about investment and business in Africa. And him and his friends were at a point where they were considering investing into buying a property in, I think it was Naivasha, somewhere there,
Mm.
here in Kenya. And then he shared the story of someone he knew that this person bought a big house, or I'm not sure if that person built a house for the short-term rental business with many rooms, invested so much money, and then in the end the business failed and that person had to sell everything. So this could have been avoided if they would have tested the market with the rental arbitrage model. However, Marvin, what do you think are the benefits of buying a property? Are there any benefits, or would you always go for rental arbitrage? And if yes, why?
I mean, buying gives you also the advantage of the property appreciation, you know. So you can also make money on this basically. Yeah, it's yours, you own it. If it's not maybe necessarily an apartment or like a house with like some kind of garden, you can also do more improvements, invest more, and it's yours. But for me, I think it's just if I imagine, for example, we buy a house or like an apartment for $100,000, for example, and we could maybe start with this multiple different Airbnbs on a rental arbitrage model. I would just say the cash flow is much higher. Yeah. Maybe you have more risk because it's not your property and more difficulties because the landlord could do anything in any case. But I would just say in general, the cash flow is just much higher and you can just diversify. You know, if, imagine you buy a property. We are based here in Nairobi as well, for anybody who doesn't know. But for example, Kilimani, there you have many different apartments that they sell, and oftentimes the Airbnbs they don't you cannot differentiate from each other. You know, they the same size, same building, same house. They might have a good location, but still all the same or like too similar. And in case you just purchase without knowing the market, without knowing the areas, without knowing if it makes you money or not, you just stuck with this property and have to sell it, and you don't make or didn't cannot make any money with it. So this is what I say, especially if you're just starting out. I'm not sure I said where everybody is from, but like if you're new to Kenya or like haven't been here in a long time and you live abroad or something, I would say it's always good to have a look at the market first before making such a big purchase, to really understand what's going on, what's happening. And as I said, especially for me, rental arbitrage right now is just much faster scalable than like purchasing one property. You know, you could have five, six different Airbnbs with the same amount of money, you know, in different locations that bring you much more returns. In my perspective, at least, I would say. I don't know what you think, but yeah.
I mean, I agree, but I also get why some people consider buying, because there is a fear, and it's sometimes justified, that when, first of all, there is the fear that how can I convince a landlord to rent me out his property to subrent it, right? And I think in this case, that fear is not justified, because it's more like a fear, or let's say a challenge, that people in the US face and in Europe face, where landlords prefer long-term tenants, and they don't want their property to be rented out on a short-term rental basis. So there is much more challenge in convincing a landlord to get the explicit approval, right, to subrent this property on a short-term rental basis, whereby on the African continent, I looked at so many properties. I never experienced a challenge like this, especially in tourist areas like the island of Zanzibar or the Kenyan coast, where it's actually obvious that you that you rent the property to make money with it on a short-term rental basis, right? And most of the time on the African continent, the advantage that we have as diasporas, I would say, right, or as foreigners, is that the landlord has more, or at least sees more security in us, that the rent is being paid on time. And sometimes that's all they want, right? That all they want is someone to take care of their property, to appreciate it and value it and not destroy it, and pay the rent on time. And still, there is this fear, which is justified, where people say, well, what if the landlord sees the business is going well, then kicks you out because he thinks I say thinks that he can do it himself. And why would a landlord even rent out that property when he knows that he could rent it out himself via Airbnb? And so, yeah, Marvin, do you want to answer this question or share your experience?
I mean, from just what I've seen, is that sometimes when the just a case I saw in Zanzibar from one of our friends as well, is like, for example, they see it goes well, and they see you have guests coming in and coming out, for example, and then they might assume that, okay, this is so easy, I can do this well, you know. But the problem is that they don't understand, first off, where the guests are coming from, how to get the guests, you know, how to properly like take care of them, and how to actually put in love into the apartment or the house, whatever it is, to attract these guests even, you know. Because just the problem I often see is that they just have a house and they try to sell the bed to sleep, but it's not really inviting, you know. And if it's not really inviting, I'm not even considering staying in this kind of place, because it's, yeah, I don't, they're like, I have another 100 or 1,000 options. Why should I stay in this place, you know? And then in the end of the day, they take it back. They lose out on money because they are not able to rent it out again, and then it's they have the same issue over and over again, you know. So yeah, I've seen this a couple of times. I think you told me a couple of stories about this, you know, like about the other people that where this happened. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a risk, you know. It's a risk is there. Um, but I said I would say it can happen, but it's yeah, I wouldn't say it happens all the time, or like in, I don't know, 50% of the cases is much less, but it's just a risk to be aware of in case you take something like this on. To just have clear structures with the landlord. Maybe don't involve him too much into the business. Don't let him too much see what's happening. You know, just to avoid it completely. That he knows what's going on, like on a bigger scale. You know, this would be at least the things I have in my mind to avoid this. I don't know if you have anything else to add here.
I mean, there are so many things to avoid to minimize the risks, right? So, for instance, vetting the landlord, understanding his background, what his financial, how stable that landlord is financially, right? But I don't like to operate out of fear, but and this is also what I share with the community members of Homebase Africa. My experience of working with landlords and doing the rental arbitrage model without any issues, on the contrary, full support by the landlord, is by creating win-win situations, which is what I teach the community members, right? There are certain ways that you can not just make your landlord um, you know give you the permission, but take ownership and give you full support. And even like in my case, in two properties on the island of Zanzibar, the landlord took over the role of the property manager, and that's the reason why I was able to run this business remotely for such a long time and still do. And so, yeah, I think there's a legitimate fear, but if you understand how to talk to landlords, if you understand how to create win-win situations and, you know, create conditions that the landlord sees that he has much more to gain with you, right? No, I mean much more to lose if he doesn't work with you. That's, I think, the way to go, basically.
Mhm.
That's also because many people say, well, Airbnb is a very exploitative business. And this might be true in so many cases, right? In Europe, we see that gentrification, and also in US American cities. However, on the African continent, I believe it gives people access to participate, the Airbnb business, small people to participate in the tourism industry. My landlord is a perfect example, right? I don't gatekeep, I support him. We built a meaningful relationship over the year. Right now, he's because he has a big piece of land where he built multiple properties. Two of them I rented for myself, and now he's in the process of finalizing a four-bedroom, I think, four-bedroom villa right behind me, and he can count on my full support. That is why he even started this building process. He wants to start his own Airbnb business, and he will get my full support in terms of mentorship, and even there will be ways that we can cooperate and even host bigger groups, you know. And so yeah, I think that's the most important thing if you approach the Airbnb business from a rental arbitrage strategy, that you understand where your landlord is coming from, what the needs of the landlords are, and how to create a sustainable win-win situation where everyone profits and everyone wins and grows. And so, yeah, um, the thing is, with I think one of the benefits of purchasing a property, if it's through like for instance in Zanzibar we have the ZIPA approved development projects, right? It's for those who have the means, a pathway to a residency. Marvin, maybe you can, because you're very familiar with this kind of development projects, share your thoughts and how that would look like now when it comes to residency in contrast with a rental arbitrage Airbnb business model.
Yeah, I mean, there are many ways to the same destination. There are like many ways to residency, at least from what I know. What I'm aware of, and this is varies, but also for every different country. Like Kenya is different than Tanzania or Zanzibar, than to any other country as well here on the continent. But from what I see, for example, what you mean is like Zanzibar, they have a specific investment program, like a support program from the Zanzibar Investment Authority, where they have certain ZIPA approved projects. And in these projects, these are like specifically projects that are from investors that work with these investment authorities together. And if you purchase a property there, it can be an apartment house, whatever, but at least it has to be 100,000 US dollars. Then you get also access or like the possibility to acquire like a residency visa, what also is a business permit then. So you can, I think it's there in this case C11 or C12 or something like that. And this also grants you the permission to operate this as a business, as at least as I'm familiar with this. But that's why I also say like there are many ways to the same destination. It's like even if you do like a joint venture in, let's say, even Zanzibar, you partner with a local, because that the law I think requires you to give the local partner 70% of the company. If you open a local company, you can still either employ yourself in the business, or if you have enough investment, I don't know what the exact number is for Tanzania for the investors permit, but I think it's 2.5 million, depending on the sector where you invest, can be also 300,000. It's really like it's dependent on what you're doing. It gives you also access to investors permit. And similarly in Kenya or like any other country, there's so many different ways to obtain the residency permit, what also grants you access to work and do business in the country. But these are just a couple of them to mention. Said every country has different options, but just to give you a few that you can have a look in case it's interesting for you guys. Maybe I forgot something. If there's anything you add, when here.
Yes, no, this pretty much sums it up. And now to just recap. So, the strategies to enter the Airbnb business on the African continent and basically anywhere we've covered so far are: number one, renting out a spare room in one of your properties, right? Ideally, if you have parents on the African continent who have a family home and they want to generate additional income, create jobs for your family members. That's what I did, how I started. I was able to employ many of my family members as drivers to take care of the airport transfer, as you know, yeah, all these daily tasks that are connected to running a short-term rental business, a cleaner, someone who helps with securing the property, etc. The second strategy that we covered is the rental arbitrage model, where you rent a property to then list it on a short-term rental platform, of which Airbnb is just one out of many. And this is a great way to enter the game of Airbnb for those who want to start small, want to test the market, don't have a big capital, you can basically start, let's say, if you have the residency of that country, maybe a residency by descent, because you're a citizen, or your parents are a citizen and you're a national of whether it's Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, whatever. If you have the residency, then you can start with as little as 6,000 US dollars, right? And the Airbnb arbitrage model is a perfect example that shows you that you don't need to own property to make money with it, to rent it out on a short-term rental basis. The third strategy that we have covered so far is renting out a property that you own. So purchasing and investing into buying a property and then rent it out via Airbnb. And so far we have pretty much covered the pros and cons, the benefits, the challenges, briefly how to overcome the challenges. Now, last but not least, I want to, before we close down, and please, if you have questions, drop them in the chat below. I want to speak about one of the smartest ways to enter the Airbnb game because it requires zero capital. And last week I had a conversation with Marvin. So we have our rental arbitrage Airbnbs, right? That are really doing well, performing well, profit margins over 70%, occupancy rate over 95%. And I asked him if you could, if you were like in the beginning of starting this Airbnb journey and you know what you know today, and if even if money wouldn't play a role, right? How would you start? How would you start your Airbnb business today? And his answer was, I would start with co hosting. And co hosting requires zero capital. And so, Marvin, please explain what co hosting is and why you believe that's the best way to enter the game of Airbnb.
Let me give you my reasoning first. And I think always, just maybe for more context, yeah. Whenever I started a couple of different businesses, like just to try out and like just to find what works, what doesn't work from all the experiences I made. And it was mainly always that I started businesses that didn't require any money because I either started by providing service because I had knowledge and I had skills that I could sell, and this basically is for me always the especially if, let's look at the cases where like coming to the African continent, whatever country it is. If you haven't been here for a long time, if it's maybe your first time, if you're from the States, like wherever you're from, if it's the first time or you haven't been here in a long time and want to start a business but you're not used to the environment anymore, for me you have a much higher risk of failing, or like a higher risk or in general, because everything is so different. If it's new to you, it's not, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's just like more difficult to enter the market the very first time just to get to know everything. And therefore, for me, when I wouldn't know anything about Airbnb and just want to get a feeling for this kind of business model, I think co-hosting is a nice way, because it simply means that you, let's imagine like Winnie has a property and she maybe is too busy or doesn't reach the numbers she reaches, so she wants to make more profits, want to generate more revenue, get more guests in, however you want to say it. Then she basically can contract me or you or whoever as a co-host. This means the co-host helps her to manage all the operations, take some like weight from her shoulders. Means like take care of the guest communication, takes care of maybe listing on different platforms. So really, basically takes care of all the online operations that this business basically requires to get more customers into the door, to make more revenue, more profits, as well as essentially like put the right price into place. Because also there are many mistakes I see hosts here doing, and one of the biggest one is where I say prices, like they just put in the price of, let's say, $50, and they leave it the entire year $50, even if the season fluctuates, and they just are waiting for customers and think just because they have a home or a house or something that they should receive some customers. But there's so many different nuances, so many different tactics, so many different things you could do to get more guests into the door. And this is basically what a co-host does. You know, like there's also different kinds of levels for like you could also take care of managing the cleaners on the ground, or if you really want to be more hands-on, even if you're abroad or remote or whatever, just to enter and try this business model, even if you're local and live here somewhere on the continent and it's the first time you hear this business model, you could also do this and like help different property owners or like Airbnb hosts, short-term rental hosts to just get more clients and take some time off from them, basically, if that makes sense. That's what I think. As I said, for me, the reasoning is just because I also always choose less risk businesses in the beginning, especially that require less capital, because this really gives you there's so much. People always think, for in my perspective, people always or like oftentimes think they always need like so much capital, so much money to start a business, but oftentimes it's just maybe that we don't know all the options we have, and this is one option, for example, to get into the same business just with less risk. You know, you let's say you let Wayne invest all the money. She has the property, but now she needs help with getting money out of this property she has. So you can profit from this as well without investing 1 cent into this business at all. That's I would say why I think it's a very good way, especially for people who have no experience, or for also for young people or like tech savvy people. It's a good thing to get into something like this, get experience with the business model, and if you then afterwards say, okay, now you acquired your first couple of clients, and even if you think you could scale this to a bigger business, you can also do it like this. But at least this gives you also the hands-on experience, at least from the business operations perspective, from the marketing perspective, to be more confident and to be like to say then afterwards to save your money up and then to invest into your own properties if this is the way you want to go. Yeah,
Yes,
that's what I
exactly.
think. Yeah.
That's really, I think, one of the smartest ways, especially for people who still want to, gain hands-on experience before they invest into their own property, who want to understand how the business model works. And then there's two different ways to agree and get compensated. So let's say I have an Airbnb, I have a property, right? And yeah, Marvin, for instance, is my co-host, and he has optimized my listings and my bookings. They, went up by at least 30%. And so there's two different ways to make an agreement. So either he can be paid on a commission basis. So you can agree on a certain percentage that Marvin receives from each booking, or you as a co-host in general, I mean. And then there is the way to get a fixed payment. I'm not sure if it's per booking or per month. However, there's different ways to make an agreement with the owner of the listing, the Airbnb listing. And yeah, what I found fascinating about this is the more time I spent here on the African continent, and those who follow my channel, not just here on Instagram, know that I traveled a lot, right? There are so many beautiful Airbnbs and properties, but they are managed poorly. Like when you compare it to the short term rental market in Southeast Asia, Europe, or the US and Canada, there's many hosts that are professional, that are operating really effectively, that they know what they're doing, right? Whereas, unfortunately, on the African continent, you will see the most beautiful properties with immense potential, but an empty calendar. And
Mm.
so these people clearly need help. And imagine if you approach them, of course, you must have some, you cannot become a co host knowing nothing, right? You need to have some level of knowledge and understanding of how the business works. And there are different ways to acquire, to build the skills to become a co-host, right? Same skills that you will need when you start your own Airbnb business. Luckily, you can get a lot of information for free on YouTube where you can learn. Like, for instance, my channel, I think, has become one of the largest platforms for free content on how to start an Airbnb business on the continent, where I give so much free value and lessons, share my experiences. So you could learn on YouTube. However, if you For instance, if you want to save time, avoid costly mistakes, right? There's also always a way to invest in yourself through mentorship. Like, for instance, Marvin and I have recently launched Homebase Africa, a private community and Airbnb training program. And the first and only, by the way, that exists in this form and shape, specifically designed for the African continent, since the challenges that hosts face on the African continent are unique, and so are the opportunities. And so, if you feel like you want a shortcut and want to understand how this business works fast and the guerrilla tactics to increase your bookings and occupancy rate, then this would be also a very good investment, right? To acquire the skills and learn how to run this business. And so, if you have the skills, right, and you approach one landlord, I mean, an Airbnb listing owner, telling him, listen, I see your listing isn't performing as well as it could, and I can help you make more money. Who would say no, right? And so, Marvin, maybe since you're co-hosting already, have experience in that, and have been approached by many investors. There are people abroad, wealthy people, Africans living in Europe and renting out there. That's one mistake that also many landlords make. So they invest their hard earned money, right? That they saved over years in Europe or in America in buying a property in Kenya, in Addis Ababa, in Zanzibar, what have you, because they want to benefit and participate in the growing tourism economy, right? And rent the property out via Airbnb. However, they make the mistake that they give the job, like the task, and to take care of the Airbnb and the operations to a nephew, a daughter, a cousin who either doesn't care about the business or doesn't have the necessary skills, right? And these people actually need professional help, and there are so many of them on the continent. So, and that's also a lot of opportunities for you to enter the game with zero upfront investment cost. Marvin, how would you, like, for someone who's interested in starting co-hosting today, what would you recommend that person? How can he find and identify potential listings and
Mm.
approach the owners?
Mm. So I would say the easiest way is just to go onto the Airbnb platform itself, because there you will have all the listings. Let's say you take Nairobi as an example, or any other city, can be Accra, can be even the outer skirts, Kisumu, smaller cities all over the continent, doesn't matter. Um, you could you could then identify like very still unique properties, because there was, just to give you an example, I was staying in a nice container house on the edge of like a big valley where everything was green, like white, very widespread and beautifully green and just natural and so peaceful. Very nice designed home, very unique place. I really enjoyed my time there. But this place, whenever I check the calendar, still I get sad because it's empty all the time. You know, they have so little bookings, and even if it's such a unique property in a unique location, but then I look at the listing, I know why. You know, like you then, if you find a unique property that's calendar is empty, so if you find this property, you just look through different ones. You click on them and you can check, if you go to the, like, act like you would book the place, and then you can see the calendar dates, and you see in the future if the dates are blocked, means they have clients coming. Yeah, and you can also check out then in the same breath the reviews. If they have recent reviews, a lot of recent reviews, then this means that they're getting bookings. And if they don't have reviews, the calendar is wide open, this means they're not getting bookings. So just as to look for the indicators. And if you see this, I would always look the lowest hanging fruits. Oftentimes for this is either the pricing is completely wrong, because we had another member also in the community. She just changed the price because she was just trying to target the price that was way too high. After she matched her prices with the market rates, because she had no reviews in the beginning, she got bookings instantly and was almost fully booked out after a month and a half or something, like for the next 3 months. So very quick results. But also look mm, at the customer's perspective. You know, like if you scroll through these listings and you click on them, like what do the pictures tell you? You know, how do you feel when you look at the pictures? Would you book this place? If you then go to the description, would you, is this enticing to you? You know, like just I always go. Also, whenever I run like campaigns or marketing campaigns or like consulting businesses, whatever it is, we always had to look 100 times over the customer's perspective. Means like, how does it feel for yourself if you scroll through the listing? Would you book it? And if you identify something that has a huge potential, but you feel like the pictures could be changed, the title could be changed, the descriptions could be changed, or like there's a lot of things you could include into the listing that's not filled out yet, then I would try to reach out to the host. You know, maybe you can find them on different channels as well, because on Airbnb you cannot exchange contact information directly. And I think it would be very expensive to book a stay just to get their WhatsApp number or something. Would be a little bit too costly. But oftentimes hosts also have their property then listed on Google Maps or something. You know, if you go in the description, sometimes they have the name of the property. You know, if you find the name, you can just Google it, and if you Google it, sometimes you can find it either on Google My Business, they have their profile there, or on Booking.com, where you can, I think, more easily like contact the host or like exchange your contact information with them, or just give them a call directly. And I think if you do this with enough properties, because there are many that have potential but they're not living up to it, if you reach out to enough of them, I think it's impossible for me to not get a client from this one. You know, of course, you need to also like talk to them nicely. Even I would do it. Even my first gigs, I did for free. You know, like many of my first clients, just to get experience in, I did for free all the time, just to learn to be part of this business, to understand what I need to do, and afterwards, this time I spent for free and not the money I didn't make made me eventually later on much more, because then I had so much more experience. This is what I would say would be the easiest path to identify and to get into it. Maybe you have something to add here, Winnie, as well.
No, I the only thing is I'm glad that you mentioned it is the willingness to start for free,
Mhm.
because that makes it almost impossible to say no for them, because they don't have much to lose, right? They can only win. I mean, of course, you could totally mess up their listing, but which is very unlikely. However, yeah, it's a great way, like see it as an internship, and then if the landlord sees, the owner of the Airbnb listing sees, wow, my occupancy rate has increased by 25%. I'm making 50%, my revenue has doubled since Marvin took over my listing. And then you can still, after a month, say, I would love to continue working with you. However, it would be great if we could agree on a, fixed commission, whatever. And so, yes, so I'm very glad that you joined today, Marvin. You gave very precious insights. There's so many different ways to start your Airbnb business, and it all depends on the means you have, the experience, the knowledge, and also how committed you are, right? So definitely it's the short-term rental business is, I think, one that will grow immensely in the future, especially if we look at the overall tourism growth and boom on the African continent, the rising middle class, right, which will result into increased domestic travel, right? And so, yes, if you consider starting a purpose-driven Airbnb business on the continent, starting a life on the continent with the goal, like starting a business with the goal to relocate and build generational wealth, and you don't want to do it alone, but want to do it in a community of like minded people who are all on the same path like you, then please feel free to check out the link in the description below, where you can, when you click on the link, join the Homebase Africa community. We also have a free community, a free Homebase Africa community, where we also share our resources. We will share the link as well. And if you're ready to launch, if you ready to be in a community with serious people, people who are actually paying to be part of a private inner circle, right? I think it's really the most incredible community that you can imagine. People from the diaspora, from over 20 different countries, investing all over Africa, all with the same goal of uplifting local communities, giving back, building home bases, curating experiences, sharing their story, it's just beautiful to be surrounded by these people. Every
Mhm.
time we have two group calls per week where the members get direct access to us, where they can directly ask their questions. And every time after such a live call, I feel so uplifted, like so empowered because of the beautiful energy, everyone supporting each other. I love the spirit of collaboration. So if you want to be part of this game changing circle, if you want to be surrounded by a circle of mentors, experienced hosts, and people who are willing to share their resources, people on the same path like you, who are willing to hold you accountable each step of the way, then you should check out our private Airbnb Africa Homebase community. And so, yes, I hope you enjoyed this live stream. Marvin, thank you so much again for joining.
Thanks for
I
having me.
know it's very late in Nairobi. I am also
Mhm.
almost falling asleep,
Yeah,
but
time to go to bed. But I hope everybody here got some value. It was nice here being here on the channel again. Yeah, I appreciate it, and on to many more like this. Yeah.
yes, hopefully
Mhm.
we will have him more often on this
Mhm.
channel. And again, follow his channel, his YouTube channel. He's dropping gems every week. His link to his channel is also in the description. Bye.
Bye
Usiku mwema.
bye.
Night.
Bye bye. Now.